Hello everyone, TLSG here, back again with another daily Marvel Snap video. So today I have a deck list that I didn't make. I saw this deck list posted by Tianding on Twitter, and if you don't know who Tianding is, he is the principal data scientist and game designer at Second Dinner. And so he posted this tweet that they're starting to see people experiment successfully with Miles, and here are some good decks with Miles included in terms of win rate and cube gain from recent data. And so initially I looked at the decks and I see decent combos. So especially for deck one, you see some decent counterplay, but I'm just not seeing like incredible combos. And then I thought how obtuse it is to disagree with the principal data scientist for Second Dinner without giving the decks a try. And so out of these two decks, I built the second one, namely because it looks so interesting. There are so many combo pieces in this deck that I'm not entirely sure what they're doing, what their main purpose is. So for example, Hulkbuster. I don't know who Hulkbuster target is in this. Typically you want a Hulkbuster like a Human Torch, a Deadpool, something that you're moving. We don't have those in this one. Maybe the intent is to Hulkbuster into Nightcrawler so you have that flexible 6-power play. Potentially, that could be a potential play line. But I think it's something that we're going to jump in and see, and we're going to test out the deck. I don't know, I haven't ran it. I don't know if it's going to do incredibly well, incredibly poorly. I do think it's going to be really consistent at triggering Miles because it has 4 different movement components in it in Nightcrawler, Juggernaut, Polaris, and Magneto. And then we also have Korg and Rockslide to disrupt the enemy. We have Kraven, which I thought was an interesting add because when we move their cards, or if the opponent moves their cards, Kraven is going to be able to get buffed up. And so instead of just doing a 5-power move with Polaris, that becomes a 7-power move with Polaris because we get the additional +2 from Kraven. And so maybe we'll have some decent luck. I'm excited to jump in and try it out. But let's run through the deck list really quickly. I'm going to keep this a little bit more high level than normal because I didn't build this deck list. This is just my assumptions based on the cards that are in this list and what they're there for. So first up we have Korg. Korg is going to add some disruption onto the opponent's board. We don't have an Angela to buff up with our 1-cost cards, so as soon as we get a 1-cost card, a lot of times it's going to be advantageous for us to drop him on the board. This is going to add a rock, potentially cause the opponent to not draw into their key combo pieces so that they can't make that big late game play. And then we have Nightcrawler. Nightcrawler is going to be a good way to trigger our Miles Morales, and I think a decent target for Hulkbuster, but that's about it. And having Kraven in this list, if we move Nightcrawler over into the Kraven lane, we will be able to buff our Kraven up. And so we have a couple of pretty cheeky ways to buff up Kraven. I think he can get pretty large in this deck list pretty quickly or pretty easily. We then have Black Widow. This is another means of disruption towards the opponent. Not only is it going to clog their side of the board, but it's also going to disrupt their draw for 1 turn. And then we have Kraven. Kraven is going to benefit from any opponent's moves, any of our moves. If we play this before a Bifrost comes up, we can get some bonuses from it moving from that. Kraven can become a pretty formidable card in this list, but I don't know his overall presence or how powerful or impactful he's going to be with this list, other than being able to kind of buff up slowly but surely as cards get moved around. And then we have Juggernaut. Juggernaut is going to move an opponent's card out of a lane that we don't want it to be in. So if there is a kiln location we want it to finish getting locked down, if there is a lane that we really want to make sure we have locked down, maybe we're going to try and force them to cap out one of their other lanes, Juggernaut can come in to try to do that job. But Juggernaut a lot of times is kind of tricky. The value is not always easily known, and you still have to do some guesswork to make sure that you hit one of those priority targets. And then we have Hulkbuster. I don't know. I've given you my thoughts on Hulkbuster. The only thing I can think of is Nightcrawler to be able to move around easily, but honestly, I don't know. It's also good if you play a card in Sinister London and then you play this onto that card in Sinister London because it will duplicate. Sinister London will then duplicate the buffed up version of Hulkbuster, which will be the original card, so that on reveal would trigger again. So let's say we did that on top of a Black Widow, it would merge with the Black Widow, it would send another Black Widow into one of the other lanes, but that's really niche. I don't see that happening very often at all. And then we have Polaris. This is going to be able to move some of the opponent's cards into directions that we want them to be in. Sometimes we can grab a 1 or 2 cost card and move it from somewhere that benefits the opponent into somewhere that benefits us a little bit more. And then we have Maximus. Maximus initially I was kind of confused with in this list, because Maximus, his on reveal is your opponent is going to draw 2 cards. So why would we want our opponent to draw 2 cards? We don't have a 0 in this list. We don't typically want to drop this on turn 6, I don't think. And so I was curious, what is his purpose? The only thing I can think of is that if you combine Black Widow and Maximus on turn 5, you can drop Black Widow, they will have their Widow's Bite in hand, and then you can play Maximus, which at that point the opponent won't be able to draw their cards, so you have a big turn 5 play and that last turn disruption. But again, that's just my assumption. And then we have Miles Morales. His presence is easily known. He is a 4-cost 5-power card as long as we move a card the turn before. But I believe you have to have him in hand when that movement takes place. I don't think you can move a card and then top deck him, and then he costs 1, which, I don't know, seems a little bit counterintuitive to me because his text reads, if a card moved last turn, not, and I was in hand. But I believe that's the way it functions currently. And so if we move one of the cards, we can then drop him for really cheap onto the board. Maybe we do a turn 6 Miles and Arrow play. Maybe we do an early game. We just kind of get him out onto the board early so that we can finish the game off with our curve of Rock Slide, Arrow, and Magneto. We have a couple of different play paths with this deck list. I'm interested to jump in and try it out. Then we have Rock Slide. This is going to be a bigger Korg. He's going to shuffle 2 rocks into your opponent's deck list. He's a 4-cost, 6-power. Usually by that point in the game, a lot of times the opponent will have their key combo pieces, but if we can delay them drawing long enough, so if we do Korg first, then we do Black Widow, that's 2 chances for them to not draw into any of their combo pieces that they need. And then we miss a turn, then we do Rock Slide on 4, that throws in 2 more potential disruption pieces. A lot of times combining those 3 can completely brick an opponent's hand. And then we have Arrow. Arrow is going to move the opponent's card that they played that turn into a different direction. Since she's been buffed up to 8, she feels okay for the most part. She's a little bit easier to utilize, especially if we use her on turn 6 alongside of Miles Morales. That allows us to do a pretty big last turn play and guarantee where those cards are going to go. And then finally we have Magneto. Magneto is great if the opponent maybe stormed a location, or if they have a Wong and they're wanting to trigger that on reveal. Magneto is going to be pretty decent at disrupting the opponent, and if not, he is a big 12-power board presence either way. And so that is the deck list. We are going to go ahead and jump into a few games. I hope you guys enjoy. All right, so first up we have Daru, and in our starting hand we have the Maximus, Kraven, and Polaris. So we're going to be able to play Kraven on 2, then we could start trying to move cards around. And then even if we do, let's say, Kraven over here, and then we stack cards into Strange Academy, we may get the upside of having those move into the Kraven lane, which will buff him up further. And then while we are waiting for the turn to play out, I have a couple of callouts that I want to give from our last lunch live stream. So we had Toyez upgrade their channel membership to further help support me and support my content. So thank you so much, Toyez. We also had Austin Woodall, who used the super chat feature to send a message during the stream. The text-to-speech bot read it out loud. They donated a small amount to us, to the channel. And so thank you so much, Austin, for your support as well. It is very greatly appreciated. So they dropped an Ebony Maw and Nightcrawler into Xandar. I think what they were planning on doing is dropping, either they're going to go wide, or they were planning on dropping some cards here to be able to push or have them pushed over with the Bifrost. But with Kraven, that will buff him up. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to drop a Polaris that will pull their Nightcrawler over or their Ebony Maw over. And then when Bifrost triggers next turn, it will push them over. We will get buffed up again. Kraven will get double the buffs from this movement interaction. And I think it should be pretty worthwhile. And then we actually have Arrow as well, who's going to be able to force more cards to move into the Bifrost lane. I think we are okay with that. Either way, Miles is going to be 1 cost next turn. We can do the Black Widow and Maximus play. I like this play line. I don't know what they're planning on dropping with Wave. Maybe something that can go wide. But wherever they drop it, we're going to be able to pull it over into the Bifrost with Arrow. Oh, it's unfortunate. We had a lot of good movement. We had a lot of good utilization from Kraven coming up. The Miles Morales was going to be cheap. We had the Black Widow and Maximus play line. And so they did end up retreating, but not a bad first match. Let's go ahead and jump into the next one, see if we can kind of keep it rolling. All right, so next up we have Zero CT. And the first location is the Vault. So on turn 6, cards can't be played here. We can move cards over though, which is going to benefit us ever so much. what we can do is we can go ahead and play Nightcrawler on the board. We can then play Craven. On 3, we can drop Polaris and move a card over into the Craven lane, maybe move them over into the vault. The big house, 4, 5, and 6 cost cards can't be played there. So we can drop Craven, we can go ahead and move our Nightcrawler. That will buff him up once. We can drop Polaris, that'll move the Ant-Man over, that will buff him up twice. That movement will allow us to drop our Miles Morales for a pretty cheap or discounted rate. We also have Magneto, so depending on what and where they drop cards, maybe we can force them into positions that they don't want them to be in. Ooh, so they drop an Ebony Maw into the vault, which is really interesting as a like first turn play. Very interesting. So what I would have liked, if we had Nightcrawler still here, we could have dropped the Black Widow, the Miles, and then on the last turn we could have done Polaris, and then we could have moved Nightcrawler out to have the extra space, but we did already pull that trigger. We already took that dive with the Nightcrawler move, so I think we need to lean into it. We can do Polaris, we can move the Ant-Man over, we can move the Quinjet over. That way, if they are running a Wong or Spectrum Wong deck list, we should be fine. That also puts this as the only location that they can play Wong, and so I don't think we have any way to disrupt that necessarily. We have the Black Widow to disrupt their draw a little bit, which we will drop soon. It's just a matter of when. And so they have Mr. Fantastic, which pushes power to the left and right, which is interesting. With our Craven, we're able to buff that one up. It is now a 6 power card. Now I'm torn. I want to drop Rockslide to disrupt their draw potential, but I also really want to drop Spider-Man, or I really want to drop Miles Morales. If we don't drop Miles this turn, he becomes a 4-cost cardigan. He becomes a cardigan. I say we go with the instant buff of the Black Widow, or the instant disruption with Black Widow. We go with Miles Morales. They can't play cards directly here, so they're going to have to rely on like a Spectrum or Wong buffing it up. And so they play a Mystique, which copies the Mr. Fantastic's ability to push that power left and right. We've pushed all of our big low-cost cards into the vault instead of the big house, so we don't have a lot that we're able to drop there. What we can do is drop a Rock Slide, hope that it disrupts their draw. Maybe they're still looking for a Spectrum. We're going to drop Rock Slide. We can drop an Arrow to move any cards they drop over, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. So now we have to look out for... Oh, now we have to look out for a potential... Okay, so we can do Magneto here, and I think it should be fine. Okay, so they ended up snapping. We can do a Magneto play. That will potentially pull their Mr. Fantastic and their Mystique over, taking that power away from the big house, pushing it over into the raft, depending on what they drop here. If they drop a Spectrum, that's going to buff these 2 cards up by 2. So a Spectrum will trigger once, so it's going to be 2, 4, 6 extra power here, 2, 4, which is not enough to win the vault location as is. I think we're still okay doing the Magneto because the most that we're going to pull over is, actually, if they do a Spectrum, we're going to pull over 6 extra power into the raft. Let's go with Arrow instead. I know it feels weird, but if they drop a Spectrum to buff up their ongoing cards, we will still win the vault, but pulling these over would end up feeling pretty bad. Let's go with the Arrow play. Let's hope to see a Spectrum. Oh, no, we don't. We see a Rock, and we do see a Spectrum. And so Spectrum will buff up this lane a little bit, but they're not able to push the left lane up enough. They're not able to push the right lane up enough, just barely. Just barely. But had we dropped our Magneto, even though we had an extra 4 power on it, I guess they only had 1 slot left, so we would have pulled the Mr. Fantastic over, so we would have still won by 1. But had they not dropped the Rock, we could have pulled both of these, and then we would have ended up losing as a result. And so, not a terrible win. It still feels, I don't know. I'm still not comfortable with it. We need to keep trying and see if we keep winning cubes. But so far, so good with this list. All right, so next up we have Inferno Chicken. And we did actually just lose a game to this user. However, we hit record and then it only recorded for 17 seconds before kicking off. So I'm not able to showcase that match. Otherwise, I was going to keep it in because we used Hulkbuster. They ended up pulling our card with Polaris, which won them Mojo World later down the line, of course. But it was just very interesting. And so I'm still trying to find the Hulkbuster justification in the list. But we are going to play Craven. We can use Polaris to pull their Sunspot over into Monster Metropolis. That is going to get it out of Kiln. Now we're not so sure. So now actually I think we use Polaris into the Savage Land. I do want to pull the card over into Monster Metropolis to buff up Kraven. But I think given the like restricted spacing that they have in Savage Land, would this be better? No, we're just going to go with Monster Metropolis. That's what we're going to stick with. That's what we wanted to do. We were going to try and cap out their location with Savage Land. That's why we were going to do it. That's right. We were going to play Polaris because we could potentially pull a Raptor into Monster Metropolis instead of the Sunspot away from Kiln. So in that case, it looks like we lose the Kiln location pretty heavily. We could do Miles Morales this turn, or we can do Rock Slide, which is going to add 2 rocks into their deck list. That's potentially going to disrupt their draw. I'm going to snap off of it. It's a little preemptive. We don't have a surefired win. They could have a really, really strong card that's going to combat this lane or this lane, but I want to push our advantage before they draw into a rock. They're much more likely to stay if they haven't drawn into the rock just yet. So they do have a Magneto. They're going to potentially be able to pull one of our 3 or 4 cost cards into a different lane on the final turn. So we can disrupt their draw with Black Widow, but I don't think we need to. I think that clogs the board more than it helps. We can go with a Juggernaut. Maybe we just go with Miles. We can do Miles into Monster Metropolis. We can later move Nightcrawler over. That leaves us a free space to do like a Juggernaut, maybe a Juggernaut and a Maximus. That way they can't pull our cards with our own Magneto. That's what we're going to lean towards. I don't know that it's great. That's what we're going to go with. So they had a Juggernaut, so they were going to try and send whatever we had probably over into Kiln, interestingly enough. And so if they drop their Magneto here, then it takes away 6 of our power, because they would at that point have the highest power card, and then we would lose that kind of crown or bonus. But at the same time, if we do something like Magneto, that will pull these 2 cards over. Even if they do a Magneto, it'll pull one of our cards back, the Polaris or the Spider-Man. But I think the 2 power buff onto, I think this is our play. We're gonna have 5 and 5. So they do Magneto, so that pulls over our Polaris. We should win the Savage Land. When we use Magneto and pull their Juggernaut and White Queen over into the Monster Metropolis, that should give us the win in Savage Land. It should give us the win in Monster Metropolis, right? I calculated it wrong, but we win the Monster Metropolis by enough that the tie in the far right lane doesn't matter. It's irrelevant at that point. This deck makes my brain hurt. Like there are so many play around potential play lines, so many move potentials into Kraven, so many like counter plays. We could have done so many different things to push cards around that I'm sure I'm not running it fully optimally. But overall, we are 3 wins and 1 loss. All for at least 4 cubes, because looking at our hand or what we have on the board, it doesn't look like we have just an outright win. And so maybe that's why the principal data scientist reported this one, that there's higher cube gains, because the opponent's like, this is nothing. Like they don't have anything here. Let's go ahead and jump into a couple more, see if we can keep having this result. If so, this is a pretty decent list. All right, so next up we have Ghost Rider. Starting off, we have Nightcrawler, we have Kraven. We have the infamous Hulkbuster that I'm so puzzled. I'm so intrigued what the main usage of Hulkbuster was in this list. I may respond to the principal data scientist on Twitter and see if I can get some additional insight into it, because I'm truly very, very curious. Let's go ahead and move the Nightcrawler over. There's no benefit for us keeping him in Onslaught Citadel just because that just opens us up to a potential Electra play. Now, if it's a Killmonger, we can't stop a Killmonger. But what we can do is make sure that we don't get hit with the Electra. So they play Shocker right off the bat, Pixel Shocker at that. We're gonna want to push their ongoing cards out of the Onslaught Citadel. Oh man, I guess what we could have done was wait to move the Nightcrawler, merged Hulkbuster, and then moved him over. That would have been a 6 power play in Sanctum Sanctorum, which is a little bit stronger than, as you know, it's a little bit stronger than just 2. I almost want to move Shocker away from the Kraven lane. The more we flood Onslaught Citadel, the harder it is for them to get bonuses. The harder it is for them to get bonuses, the easier it is for us to win one or the other lane. So let's go ahead and pull Shocker over. We're going to try to time it well where when they drop their, and then they have Squirrel Girl. So yeah, the 6 power Nightcrawler, I think, may have been the play. That's going to haunt me. That is going to haunt me. Okay, so let's go ahead and, doesn't look great. Let's do the Korg. That will shuffle rocks into their deck. We do have an arrow that we can play next turn, so we can really disrupt the location or direction that they're playing their cards. So we can do both of those into the Craven lane to buff up Craven further. We might lose Sanctum Sanctorum, but if we can angle it right. So there's the Patriot. I have to expect a Mystique to come down next, or maybe a Khazar. So let's go with Arrow this turn. Whatever they play, we'll pull it over. Then we can do Magneto as a final follow-up. If they don't flood this one, we can pull our Patriot over. And then the Squirrel Girl being a non-vanilla card, or it doesn't really help all that much. And then they extend the game with Magic, which is kind of unfortunate. That means they're going to be able to drop something like Onslaught and Mystique, but that's going to be difficult because they won't have a great target. So I think we'd go with a Juggernaut here. If we hit a card and we move it out of this lane, we will be able to do both Miles Morales and Magneto on the final turn, and that is what we are hoping for. We do hit a target, so it is the Onslaught. Sorry friend, you're not going to be able to Onslaught that Patriot today. So, which actually makes our Magneto feel a little subpar, right? So now if they drop Mystique, they will still copy the Onslaught, but this becomes, so it doubles what it currently is. So it's currently 4, so it's another 4 power to each. So it's another 8 power total, which brings them to 21. This would bring us to 22. And if they don't drop anything, then it tries to pull a 3 or 4 cost card, but we don't have any of those to pull over. The Miles will help us push a little bit higher here. I think we might be okay. I think with the Onslaught Disruption, I think we might be all right. Let's go ahead and lock this in. Let's see the Mystique play come in. That's a Doctor Doom. That is not what we thought. Oh my gosh. We do beat the Doctor Doom in the far right-hand side. I would like to thank the principal data scientist for these cubes. I feel like these are not my cubes. I didn't come up with this deck list. I actually doubted this deck list pretty heavily, but right now we're 4-1, all 4 or more cube games. Let's keep it going. All right, so next up we have Skitzat. The far left location is Death's Domain, so we may benefit from doing a Nightcrawler and a Hulkbuster and then moving it over. I'm dead set on making that Hulkbuster like make sense, but it seems like such a weird interaction because it's so few games that you actually need to move the Nightcrawler over into a very particular lane like that. I don't know, that one is just like kind of stands out to me. So let's do the Craven. If we end up moving cards around, ooh, they play directly into negative zone. Interesting. Maybe they plan on shifting what this location is. Seems really strange. So it is gonna happen, guys. We're gonna use Nightcrawler. Next turn we will do Hulkbuster. We will then move that over into Death's Domain, just in case we need a big power push. Now it does feel bad to use my turn 3 play for this, but in the name of science, that's what we're doing. We're gonna do this just to make use of Hulkbuster. I want to use Hulkbuster at least once here. So now they do Ebony Maw into the negative zone. So they're probably running either a deck that can push power wide into all of the lanes, or an ongoing buff that can benefit these 2 cards. And so we will pay attention to what they play the next couple of turns, and then kind of go from there. If they do a Wong, okay, so there's Captain America. So it does look like an ongoing style deck list. If they do a Wong at some point and we have initiative, it's going to benefit us to do a Juggernaut to push that final Spectrum play out of the Wong lane. That way it goes into the Wong direction. I'm not proud of it, but it happened. We said it. So let's go with, and we can move cards over into New York on turn 6. So let's go with a Black Widow play and a Maximus play. That's going to force them to draw into the Widow's Bite. Then they won't be able to draw into the 2 cards from our Maximus. So we'll be able to get maximum upside from him. The 7 power is going to be pretty decent nonetheless. And then we can always do something kind of cheeky on the last turn. We can do a Juggernaut and a Miles, or something similar, depending on what it looks like they drop here. Ooh, so they do a Cosmo and Mojo. Okay, interesting. Very interesting. So on reveals are not going to trigger in New York now. They can move their Ebony Maw over, but it still locks down that lane for that turn. So even if they move it out, it still counts as it being locked down until it's fully moved. It's a weird interaction, but it does. So maybe they're going to do a Spectrum here to buff up all of their cards, but we can get some upside from Kraven by moving these cards over. We can then do a Spider-Man as a 5 power play, leaving us free to do Polaris to pull one of their cards out of the New York lane. Actually, no, we don't pull anybody over, do we? In that case, I don't think it matters. But we go with a Rock Slide. That's going to give us 1 additional energy here. So this is going to be 19 total here. If they do a Spectrum, oh, we don't have enough time, do we? If they do a Spectrum, it won't trigger here, so that's fine. If they do it here, then they can't do both. Okay. Oh, they have a Widow's Bite. Interesting. So the Widow's Bite and then the Iron Man. Oh, no, that is not what I anticipated. So the... Oh, no. Oh, no, 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 no. Oh, no, 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 no. They jebaited us. I thought it was going to be the Spectrum. That's what I was planning on. They were protecting their Iron Man. All we had to do was play just a few cards here. We could have played Miles. We could have played a Rock Slide. We had it. We move Black Widow over so it doesn't hurt us. We had them beaten. All right, so we get instant chance for revenge here. We are going against Skitzat again. Last time, as you saw, they humiliated us with a really nice Iron Man play on the last turn. Knowing that we couldn't counter that, they just took the gamble that it'd be fine, that we wouldn't play into the really hard to play into negative zone. And had we flooded it, we would have reduced some of the power. Either way, we got outplayed by the Iron Man. So now we want to try to kind of combat and come back, beat them here. So it's weird that they played the Ant-Man and Mojo, and they just went ahead and capped this location out. Because honestly, I mean, I'm fine if like we don't have to push that much power here. We can do something like a Magneto, and then even if they get an additional 4, that puts them at 12. That puts us at 14. If we weren't trying to cap out this location, I would leave this one be. But because we want to cap this one out, we want to get the upside. We're going to play Polaris. That's going to pull over, hopefully, their Raptor. No, it pulls over their Mojo. Unfortunate. Probably the the one that is the least amount of good for us. Poor Miles. I don't want to play Miles here. I don't want Miles in this location. I don't think he's going to be good because we can't move anything out after this point. We are locked in to this specific amount of power. If they drop a Spectrum, if they drop anything late game, but we are going to force the Miles here. That way we can try to get the free 6 cost card. If it's let's say an Infinite, then we can skip on turn 5. We can get the upside there. So it's an Odin. Interesting. Very interesting, actually. I think we win. So they still have to play some kind of card in the raft. All we have to do is play more than, so we have to assume that they get at least 1 trigger, maybe 2 with these here. So 1 trigger is going to be a +4, so it's going to put them at 13. Another +4 is going to put them at 17. So we would need a decent amount of power here, but we have the means to do it. And so let's play the Black Widow and the Maximus. That is going to give us maximum amounts of upside. Let's go ahead and lock that in and see what they end up dropping, because they do need to invest resources into the raft to come up over us there. And so they play a Colossus. Okay, that's not quite going to do it. They still have to do at least 1 other card. So they can't just do a Spectrum. And so we can do Magneto. That's going to push us to 14. We can do Odin as well. If they do a Spectrum here to make sure that they win this location, we still win the far right lane. I think this is an easy win. But then again, I thought the last one was an easy win as well. All right, so I guess they thought the same thing. Even if they dropped a Spectrum, they had to at least cap this one out. So they were going to need to come up over here and here, and it was going to be really, really difficult to do with how much our power was spread out and how much potential we had. All right, so next up we have the Sasquatch, the very Sasquatch. So I think I'm going to play our Nightcrawler into the far right lane. New York's going to be pretty potentially advantageous for us. What we can do is play Kraven there if we draw into him, and then every single card that we move over is going to get the benefit from that Kraven movement. And so they did play Hood. We have initiative here. We can do Black Widow. Next turn we could do Polaris. If they don't end up sending us the Hood with a Viper or something like that. So let's go with the Black Widow play. We're always going to be able to potentially pull out one of their cards from Kiln, which I think we're going to have to kind of rely on a bank on. So they play Demon into the far right lane, which turns out is a Savage Land location, which takes up a lot of our space. Do we pull another card into Kiln, or do we try to pull... Nah, let's pull a card over into the Savage Land. Let's finish capping that location out. That way we know exactly how much power they have there. We can then assess how much power we need to push into that location. As a result, we may end up losing Kiln. Actually, they can still shift with New York. I don't like that play as much. I don't like that play nearly as much now. Let's just go with a good old Hulkbuster. That is what we're doing. We're going to merge with Black Widow here. I know I knocked it, but I probably should have tried it before I knocked it. We'll see. We'll see how it pans out in the end. And so we do have 5 power. They have a total of 2. They have a total of 2. If they don't play anything else here, then we are able to win, even if they move cards out. So that's what we want, is to have the lead by enough that even if they move their negative hood out, we're fine. And so let's play our Rock Slide. That's going to add some disruption to their list. I did go ahead and snap last turn. Let's do the Rock Slide. Hopefully that will stop them. Ooh, so they get a Venom, which is not huge. And we can pull their Venom out with a Magneto. Interesting. Not a huge power push. And so now this turn, we can actually pull whatever they play over into New York, which is going to be our best bet in terms of power. And then we can always try to do a Magneto, which if it pulls a 3-cost card, pulls Venom. I think we're in a pretty decent spot, depending on what they have. So let's do our arrow play. They drop a lot of cards, and they drop them directly into New York, so we don't get a huge upside there. They drop the free Sabretooth, the Nova, the Bucky Barnes. They are able to move cards over, which is going to be an interesting dynamic. New York always adds an entirely new level of uncertainty. So if we don't have any good 3-cost cards that we want to pull around, what we can do is do a Juggernaut and a Maximus play. So we can do a Juggernaut here. If they drop like a Carnage, then we get the upside. Maybe they don't move anything over. Maybe they drop a Carnage and then we end up pushing it into one of the other lanes. So let's go with a Juggernaut and a Maximus. We leave everything else as is. We just kind of leave it where it's at. The Maximus as is will give us the win here. The Juggernaut will make sure we win here. Depending on what they drop and what we push, it depends. New York always adds a weird element for us, but let's go ahead and lock it in. Okay, so they do end up retreating. That doesn't feel like an incredibly satisfying way to end the video, but we are 7 games in. I doubted the deck list very heavily, but it has shown that it is pretty good. It has a good power push, a good amount of play around potential. Maybe there is something to this whole data science thing. We are going to go ahead and end the video here. What do you guys think of this deck list? Do you want me to try out some of these other deck lists from time to time, periodically as I see them that I normally would think maybe doesn't make sense? And then we test it out to see if it's actually good or if it performs as they say it does. And this one, I think it did. I think it exceeded our expectations. We had a pretty good win rate. We had a win rate of 7 wins and 1 loss, and that could be a small sample size, but for us, in the middle of the day when it's usually the hardest for us to climb, it performed pretty well. Let me know what you think of the deck list in the comment section down below. I hope that you guys enjoyed the video. This has been TLSG. Later, guys.